One of the most important things we can do is to stop and listen and to validate feelings. We don't have to agree with a position. Reasonable people can and should disagree, but it's how we handle it. And it, of course, is age dependent. Somebody older is going to be different from somebody younger. But whatever the age, listening is one of the key issues. And of course, modeling the behavior that we're looking for. You know, if we're flying off the handle, we can expect that our kids are probably going to be doing the same.
Welcome to Empowered Kids TV, where we introduce you to the people and ideas to help you take action and create the family of your dreams. Today, we have two amazing guests for you. Both of these women are passionate activists that have spent decades helping us transform our lives by taking care of our first homes, our bodies, and our planet. Dr. Van Susteren is a general and forensic psychiatrist who treats psychological and emotional distress. As a thought leader, she also addresses issues related to trauma and emotional inflammation as they pertain to climate change. A leading activist, she has been on the front line, sitting on global advisory boards and conducting over 200 presentations around the world, addressing our needs around climate change, the impact it's having on our lives, and what we need to do to address it. Stacey Colino is an award-winning writer specializing in health and psychology. Author and a co-author, she literally has a library of books, including Disease Proof, The Remarkable Truth, What It Takes to Make Us Well, Strong, The New Skinny, How to Eat, Live, and Move to Maximize Your Power, and Taking Back the Month, a personalized solution for managing PMS and enhancing your health. Together, these incredible women have been featured all across different media platforms, including CNN, NBC, Fox News, to Washington Post, Parents Magazine, Good Housekeeping, and Huffington Post, just to name a few. For me, Stacey's passion to help us use our bodies so that we can be our best selves in every area of our life, and Lisa's passion and drive to show us how we're all connected to the planet, demonstrating how its health directly impacts our health, is the reason I needed to have this conversation today. So help me to welcome the authors of the new book, Emotional Inflammation, Discover Your Triggers and Reclaim Your Equilibrium During Anxious Times, the amazing Stacey Colino and Dr. Lise Van Susteren. Ladies, welcome to Empowered Kids TV.
Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you.
All right, I want to start right at the beginning and right smack dab on the cover. Emotional inflammation. Why the word inflammation?
Okay, so inflammation, obviously we know what inflammation is in a physical sense. And we realized that what so many of us are going through these days, given all of the challenges, that from an emotional perspective, it's like physical inflammation. We're raw, we're on edge, it hurts, it impedes our functioning. We have a sense that we can't do, this is something more related to emotional inflammation and the challenges we have today, that the future is really not as promising as we'd hoped. And there's a feeling of foreboding that we are approaching times which we can't really manage very well. And that's an inflammatory condition. So hence emotional inflammation.
I love it. You know, when I kind of looked into the concept and I really sort of meditated on it, like inflammation, like what did it mean for me? And again, I started exactly where you just described, thinking of what inflammation in a physical sense is and how inflammation in my own body might have been the source of disease or dis-ease without me realizing it. And then what I got from that meditative process was that there were a lot of stresses in my life that I didn't give full focus to. And what would happen is that gradually there was this new sense of norm of living with discomfort, as opposed to recognizing discomfort and addressing it and releasing it. And so that's what I took away from it.
That's a good point. Excellent.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. Nicole,
I got to say something. Not that many people, I don't think, would say to themselves, well, if I have these stressors, what are they about? And have I simply adapted to them rather than attempted to change them? And that's that's a real tribute to, I think, meditation, and of course to you personally.
Thank you, Lisa. Stacey, you wanted to add to that?
I was going to say, I like the way you used the word dis-ease, because that's a big part of this. You know, it's this sense of unease, this pervasive unease emotionally that is at the heart of emotional inflammation. If you think about physical inflammation, like you twist your ankle when you're out running, and maybe you didn't break it, but you have a slight sprain, it's uncomfortable and it puts you ill at ease moving around. And when you have more of an injury there, or a more severe injury, it can feel angry. So all of these qualities are part of emotional inflammation to varying degrees, depending on the particular person and what the triggers are. And so it's all under that umbrella. So I like the dis-ease, because at the heart of this, it's this pervasive sense that something is not right. And it pervades our psyches, it pervades our physicality, our bodies, our minds. Spiritually, it affects us on every level, socially as well. So it's really a multi-layered concept that can infiltrate your life in so many ways that you don't realize.
I love that.
Add to that the sense of swollen emotions, the swelling of so many of our emotions. These are good. As Stacey says, it does, obviously, any emotional issue affects us physically, and the repercussions physically are just incalculable.
Let's touch on some of the things that may act as triggers. I know, and we will dive deeper into it. You've got the way we respond to our triggers. But before we get to that, let's touch on some of the things that happen, especially within our families, because we're so busy, always going, moms especially, this never-ending to-do list. Sometimes things happen and they're triggering us. We're not even aware of it because we're just so busy in that go mode. So let's touch on a few things, especially I think within family life, that may be coming up as triggers for us.
Well, I'm wondering, are you asking in general or in this particular time, Nicole? Because there are, again, different layers to this. I mean, in general, it's the backdrop of your everyday life and the stressors that come up related to work and family and managing a household, raising kids and dealing with all the challenges that they encounter and trying to guide them effectively as a parent. So there's all of that, and any of those can trigger emotional inflammation. Dealing with your parents, your older parents, and depending on whether they need you or whether they acknowledge their own needs and take care of themselves, whether you have to step in, it's a multi-layered situation. And then you throw in this pandemic and all the fears that are coming with this and the frustrations. Everybody has quarantine fatigue. People are tired of being on lockdown. And so we're dealing with our own feelings along those lines. But then if you have kids, you're tending to their frustrations. And so I think if you're a mother in particular with kids in the household, it's coming at you from every conceivable direction. And you don't know what trigger to respond to first. And you don't always realize how the different triggers are affecting you, because then you're on to the next thing.
Absolutely. Lisa?
I was building on what Stacey has said, which is dead on. There's also, and this is where the self-awareness is so important, and which is why in part we wrote the book, is to encourage people to know themselves better. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. When many years ago, a guest was coming to our house, and it was a guest who has in the past, or who had in the past, created a little bit of turmoil. I love the person, it's a relative, so obviously, consciously, I was welcoming the person. But I remember my husband saying to me late at night when I had gone in to ask him about something, and I was apparently short-tempered, and he said to me, "Is so-and-so coming soon?" And I stopped dead in my tracks, and I thought, oh my God. I'm a psychiatrist. Presumably, I've been analyzed the whole bit. Presumably, these things, but we don't. And if we find ourselves off the handle, flying off like that, or showing unusual irritability, unless it's crushing you, if you can take a moment and rewind and say to yourself, what's going on? Is there something that happened? And just one last short one. Recently, the granddaughter of Robert Kennedy died in a drowning accident. And 3 weeks later, just about that time, on a Thursday afternoon, I realized I'd been in a really good mood, and all of a sudden it just darkened. And I thought, what happened? And I realized, well, this is the 3-week moment. She had worked for my sister. We knew her. And these kinds of things seep into our consciousness, and we don't know it. This is why it's so important. Rewind, try to figure out what it was that may have triggered the emotional state that you find yourself in.
I love that. You also talk about two things that I think we can be, really absent-minded about the impact on our lives. And I just want to talk about them because I think they compound the inflammation and the stresses in our lives without a sense of awareness that that's the source of it. So the first that you talk about is the impact of unsettling our body clocks. So let's talk a bit about that.
Okay, so here's the issue about our body clocks. We didn't just show up on the planet a couple of days ago. This has been going on for a long time. If you look at animals, we look a lot like them. 2 eyes, a nose in the middle, a mouth. We do a lot of stuff the same. Our DNA is the same. If you have a look at nature, which is from where we evolved and how we evolved from nature over time, we can see today that when that sun goes down, all of the planet, the animals, the plants, so there are a few nocturnals, but most everybody begins to settle down. And that's the way we used to live as well. So our bodies are really evolved physiologically. We have photoreceptors in our eyes that tell us it's getting dark, time to shut down. And a central clock radiates this message neurologically and hormonally to the entire body, time to shut down. And then when, in contrast, the sun rises, just like everybody else, we get this wake-up call that tells every cell in our body, here comes the sun. And it gives us this flush of energy and good hormones for later in the day and for going to sleep, actually, later at night. Well, what do we do in the last 100 years, 150 years? And of course, it's getting worse, not better. We flip on artificial lights. So that's just on one most basic level that we are breaking the rules that nature designed us for over millions of years. We're doing it, and it's a little bit like adolescence when parents are out of town for the weekend and they throw a big party and think there aren't going to be consequences. Of course, there are going to be beer cans somewhere and cigarette burns and everything else. So the anxiety, the alienation, the sense that we are off kilter with the world is really well earned. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So let's talk about that now in relation to the pandemic. So as parents, we have high stress levels. The day is never ending because now we've got multiple hats upon the multiple hats that we were already wearing. We get our kids to bed and we decide the best way to ease is to binge our latest TV show. And so we sit in front of the television, we binge watch for a few hours, and we're well past our bedtime. But of course, the kids are like an alarm clock and they wake us up bright and early. What is that really doing to our bodies and our emotional state, really?
Well, first of all, it's causing you to skimp on sleep. So you're probably not getting as much sleep as you need. So that's sort of the baseline. But then in addition, if you're engaging with digital devices or you're watching TV, these devices, including your television, emit blue light. And basically what that does is it resets the release of melatonin in your body and your brain. So even when you turn in and you go to bed, melatonin is not being released on schedule. So you have a harder time settling in to sleep and as deep a sleep as you want to. And you might wake up during the night more than you used to. A lot of people are sleeping more during the pandemic, but they're not sleeping well. And I think part of it is the pervasive anxiety. Part of it is also the fact that people are so glued to social media and their digital devices at night, and it's upsetting their body's rhythms. So even when they do go to sleep, they don't stay asleep. And so they wake up not feeling as well rested as they could have or should have. And then, you know, it's like lather, rinse, repeat. The whole cycle starts again. And you have to deal with your kids and your work and your household and all your other responsibilities, and you're tired. And so you're not functioning that well, or optimally anyway.
And then your emotional state just gets worse in a nice slow decline because you're compounding the problem that you started with in the first place.
Yes, you're sort of depleting yourself very, very slowly. It's kind of like having a slow leak. You know, imagine a balloon that has like a very tiny hole. It doesn't deflate instantly, but air seeps out. And that's what happens to your energy and your emotional equilibrium.
That's an excellent metaphor, and does give further weight, image-wise, to the fact that sleep is linked to so many other things, as Stacey said, their energy, your mood, and all the rest. We know that sleep deprivation also causes a whole host of physical problems, including weight gain, diabetes, and cognitive issues. It contributes to so many chronic diseases, and it can even cause, with sleep deprivation, I have seen psychosis with sleep deprivation. So these impacts have ripple effects that we can't see. And one other thing, that is when you're looking at a digital device, not only the blue light, which is hyperactivating, but when you see images that move, our brains have evolved to pay attention. This could be a predator. So we are constantly being alerted to the fact that something could be coming. So the idea that you can just then flip the light off and go to sleep, of course, is really very far-fetched. And that's why we have so many messages now about what alcohol does, because a lot of people are resorting to substances to try to get themselves to calm down and go to sleep. But it's breaking the laws of nature, essentially, that is at the root, really, of so many of our social ills and problems.
One of the things that Lisa just said about how watching TV and using these digital devices puts you on alert, that is actually one of the baseline issues with emotional inflammation. In one way or another, we are all living on high alert, whether it's because of our nighttime habits and our device usage, or because we're constantly checking news streams during the day to find out about the latest political crisis, or the latest numbers with the coronavirus, or you name it, or racial injustices and police brutality, you name it. All of that is causing us to live on high alert and be sort of hyper reactive. We are reacting so strongly, even though we're all sheltering at home, we're not seeing that many people out in the world, we're continuing to react to all of these things that are coming our way and all of these stimuli that we are subjecting ourselves to by choice.
I think this is what when I started at the beginning talking about meditating on the word inflammation, this is what came up for me. Like slowly we're getting this sense of normal that is hyper vigilant to the point where you can almost forget what it feels like to just be at peace. because this has become your new normal.
Yep.
Are you finding that as you talk to other people, to parents, even people in terms of your practice, Lisa, that that's the case for a lot of people?
Oh gosh, I won't say a lot. I'll say for everybody. I don't know anybody who isn't feeling the way you just described. And interestingly, and this is the issue that we keep underscoring about what nature brings to us and what living in harmony with nature tells us on a very deep level, that we are safe if we're living in harmony with nature. And I've done a couple of interviews outside because the house is a bit congested. A few people have come home and we're all staking out our place. So outside has become my studio sometimes.
Beautiful.
And every once in a while, there'll be a loud bird chirping in the background, and the person will say, I've had 3 instances now, and once where it happened to me when I was talking to somebody, where the person stops the interview and says, gosh, that sounds so nice, the bird chirping. These sounds tell us, natural sounds versus human-made sounds, tell us that this is a safe place. In contrast, human sounds activate the amygdala, which is our fight or flight mechanism, and it tells us, watch out, be careful. And so the images that we see, the sounds that we hear, the places, the vistas, all of this tells us you're safe. This is a good place. And that's where that sense of peace, the harmony, the goodness of fit. And we have created artificial environments that aren't always a good fit.
That leads me right into the next point. So the next point you had in terms of what we use as a layer of our stresses is disobeying our bodies and really not tuning in and giving our bodies what they need. Can we touch on that for a bit?
Sure. We've kind of been circling that subject a little bit, by talking about disrupting our schedules and so on. The body and your mind crave consistency on a physiological basis. So sticking with a regular bedtime and awakening time and ensuring that you get enough sleep in those hours is key. Giving your body the right nutrients that calm inflammation, anti-inflammatory foods such as fruits and vegetables and probiotics and prebiotics. They all kind of take the temperature down in terms of inflammation internally, but also mentally. There's a robust and growing body of evidence that is finding that the use of probiotics through foods, not supplements as well, can actually calm anxiety, which is amazing. So having yogurt every day, or kefir, or fermented foods, pickles, pickled beets, kimchi, you name it, that helps. Exercising regularly, that's something that our bodies need. For the most part, our bodies were designed to move. And what happens when we exercise, as we all know, we get an endorphin rush, and that's if we're exercising vigorously. But even with mild exercise, we get some release of endorphins, and we get other factors coming through like BDNF, which calms, and I'll let Lisa speak to this, which basically calms us internally, but also protects us from stress. BDNF basically
fertilizer, brain fertilizer.
Well, and it basically attaches to certain receptors so that stress still comes at you, but it can't attach to those receptors and trigger you. So it's almost like putting on a raincoat when you go out in the rain. The rain will still hit you, but it won't penetrate the raincoat and get you wet underneath. And this is something similar to the effects of exercise and protecting you from emotional inflammation. It's amazing.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
Thank you. So Lisa, you add on, there are other things that we should be doing to take care of ourselves physically and honor our body's rhythms.
I think sometimes, so Lisa touched really early on that self-awareness. And sometimes we take care of our bodies like it's a tick exercise. And a couple of years ago, I realized that while I was staying true to trying to work out a few times a week, so I'm getting my half an hour or my hour in, the rest of the day, the bulk of the day, I was sitting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, half an hour a day actually could not be enough. And my body was saying that, but I felt I was doing the tick box check. I exercised today. So yes, so I'm good. And so I love that you're not suggesting that there's some prescription that we should follow where we tick off we've done this on our to-do list, but that we get really in tune with our bodies so that we can feel what our bodies are aching for.
Good points all. And you remind me of something that I've often said, criticism certainly of the psychiatric community these days, where we tend to practice checklist. We call it checklist psychiatry. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Have you lost weight? And okay, if not, here, we'll stamp the prescription. And that's the end of the story. And of course, it's just the very, very beginning. It's not even the first chapter. And so the urge is to have people understand how holistic this is and how it isn't just, of course, our physical health is important, but flipping the hood and seeing what's going on underneath is absolutely critical. We're more than just a bunch of chemical reactions. We have feelings, we have a temperament style, we have prior experiences that are directing us. And it is by understanding these that we can understand this immensely complex being that we are. And we can also appreciate that as a result of that, we have certain styles. And that those certain styles we have, which of course we talked about in our reactor types, can either bring us a greater sense of a goodness of fit with others and with the world. And there's some good things about it, but there's some downsides. And then there's also the fact that we can see that maybe our particular style doesn't work with another style. And rather than trying to break the door down, we can understand that the person who is trying to withdraw is recharging, but in a different way. And so it brings us greater tolerance of each other and acceptance of differences, which is so critical now in this new era where either we understand each other and not only accept each other's differences, but celebrate them, recognizing how much we have in common, or we're not going to open right, we're not going to open smart, and we are not going to use the opportunities that some of the tragic events from COVID certainly have put before us in stopping us and having us think.
I love that you touched
what you said, Lisa, because I think that you touched on a really important point, which is about giving people the freedom to be who and how they are with this. And our styles are different, and we're getting sort of a crash course in this kind of acceptance during the pandemic if we've got other people that we're living with. And so, for example, my teenage son is here with us, and he has a different reactor type, and he has been absolutely outraged and upset by all the racial injustice that's been going on, the police brutality in this country, and so on. And his brand of emotional inflammation is the angry type, the Molten type. And so he gets agitated and angry and sort of wants to spout off. And, you know, I keep having to tell him, look, you've got to pay attention to your messaging, because right here in this house, you're preaching to the choir. My husband and I agree with everything that you're saying. And he's like, but what do I do with this? What do I do with this? I feel like I need to do something. So naturally, he wants to go downtown in Washington, D.C. and protest during this pandemic. As a mother, I don't feel completely comfortable with him doing that. But if that's important to him, I have to give him the freedom to do that. So I've been letting him, and I say, okay, you can do that. As long as you're not taking the metro, you can ride a bike down there. I can give you a ride part way and you can walk. You have to have gloves, you have to have hand sanitizer in your pocket, and you have to wear a mask at all times. These are the rules. If you say yes, you can do this. And this has been like a good outlet for his emotional inflammation. You know, but initially I was uncomfortable with letting him do that. And I realized, in fairness, I need to, or we need to compromise somehow.
I love that. I love that we're talking about the fact that the way we react, so our reactor types, is not the way to react, because especially as parents, we can just fit into this space where the way I see the world and the way I respond to the world, this is somehow the right way. And you, my kids, will follow along and fall into my mold and match the way I respond. And obviously it never happens, right? Because they're here to test us to the limit. So it never happens. So let's touch on the 4 reactor types. But as parents, how does each type mean that we would show up for our families?
That's a good question.
You want to start? Well, I'll take 2. You take 2, Stace.
Sure. So one reactor type is the nervous reactor type. And these are the people who get very anxious about all the things that they're concerned about and their triggers. They think about, well, what if? Where is this going? They might catastrophize. And they might have trouble sleeping. But basically, it's sort of about fear and anxiety. Another one that I touched on, I'm going to go out of order, Lisa. So just
That's all right. No, we can talk later about what the types that we are. People always want to know.
Right. So the other one that I alluded to is the molten, what we call the molten reactor type. And that's somebody who gets angry, irritable, maybe indignant, and outraged about what's happening and about his or her personal triggers. And that's a very different style. And, you know, if we don't understand where people are coming from with all of these, and I'll let Lisa talk about the next 2, we can rub each other the wrong way. And we can take insult or we can be insulted or offended by things people say or do if we don't realize that this actually has nothing to do with us. This is them. You know, this is how they're feeling and responding to all of the stressors and challenges that are happening in the world. And they're trying to process it. And this is their way. And this goes back to what we were saying about giving people permission to be how they are. So Lisa, you talk about the other 2.
Okay, so the other 2 are what we call the Rev Reactor. And that's the person who is always sort of frantically going about as many things as he or she can possibly do. And in fact, what happens is they've got a lot of balls in the air, and very often they drive everybody crazy because they put so many balls in the air that inevitably many of them fall to the floor, and then the frantic reactor thinks, and I will admit that that's sort of my style, I'll think to myself, well, if you helped me more, this would never happen. So, you know, this is what the frantic person does with his or her anxiety. They just stick more stuff in it. And it does provide distraction from some of the more existential questions. I've been involved in climate work for now 15 years, and I can see that this coping style, which all of these are, is a way for me to try to distract myself from some of the more frightening aspects of what I see and hear. And so that's the frantic. Then another reactor type is the retreating reactor. And the retreating reactor is a person who really gets recharged and finds a coping sort of footing by withdrawing a little bit from the world, reducing the stimulation, just the opposite of the frantic. And as we've talked about these things, we've kind of jokingly pointed out some of the sort of maybe more uncomfortable characteristics. But each one, in addition to the sort of uncomfortable things, brings a wealth of information that each reactor type would probably do well to hear. Those who are that are withdrawing, for example, you'll find that those are the ones that might be out planting a community vegetable garden and maybe talking minimally to the people around them, but nevertheless find their balance by looking at the world from a perspective that is not so distractible. Of course, the frantic person, the molten person, and the nervous person, those are the ones that, for example, got all the provisions ready when COVID was first predicted. And, you know, we all have our places along this spectrum of coping styles, But what's important is if we can name, and I'm partly frantic, and then if nobody listens to me, then I do the withdrawal thing, and kind of fluctuate between. But if we can understand that there's a name, that this helps us to put ourselves into a structure so we can better say to ourselves, okay, I get it. This is how I try to cope, or this is how this person tries to cope. There's much more of a forgiving, tolerant, accepting of differences, which is, after all, again, the number one thing in this very crowded planet that's heating up that is needed.
I think it gives so much space for compassion, because we move outside of putting people in a box and trying to say this person is this type of person. But now what we could see for ourselves and for others, especially when it comes to the people in our home, that really this person is just struggling to cope with what's on the inside. And they're struggling in this way, and this is the way I struggle, but we're all struggling. And so if we can bring that compassion together and real understanding, we can then make space for what you talk about next, which I think is the critical piece of the book. I think it's one thing to identify that we are all feeling a particular level of stress, and that stresses come to us in different angles. But what I really love about the book is that it's very practical. It's usable. Families can take it and they can say, okay, what do I do with the fact that I know I'm stressed? How do I find a space that's a healthy coping area? How do I bring more balance back to my life? And the first thing you talk about is recognizing our triggers. So let's give some tips about what do we need to do as individuals, and maybe as parents, how do we help our kids navigate? How do they first recognize their triggers?
Lisa alluded to one technique earlier, which is about sort of rewinding the tape. Like, what happened that brought me to this particular emotion or this feeling or this thought process right now? Like, what led me here? So that's one way to do it. Another way is to kind of, you can do this either on your computer, you can do this mentally, or you can do this in a journal, is to write down or think about the different strong emotions you've been feeling that have been making you uncomfortable. The different things that underlie your particular form of emotional inflammation, and then try to trace what triggers those different emotions. So for example, with my teenage son, when he starts getting particularly angsty and agitated and outraged, I'll say, whoa, let's slow down. I understand how you're feeling. Let's talk about this. What exactly is making you feel this way? And he'll say, well, I read this, that happened in the news, and I read about that. And I said, oh, what bothers you? I know what bothers him about it. That's obvious. But for him to articulate it for himself is really important. So we'll say, well, what in particular bothers you about this, and why? And that engenders self-understanding in our kids, which is so valuable on multiple levels. And it acknowledges and validates their feelings, which is also incredibly valuable. They feel seen, they feel heard, they feel recognized. And that in itself calms emotional inflammation, and it helps them process how they're feeling. And so then the next big question comes, what can you do about that? Is there some way you can channel these feelings into making things better for yourself and for other people? And let's talk about what some of those possibilities are. And it's amazing, and then before you know it, everybody feels better, at least temporarily, until the next thing happens. But that in itself is valuable.
I love it. Lisa, you wanted to add anything there?
Yes, Stacey's points are really, I think, well said, that one of the most important things we can do is to stop and listen, and to validate feelings. We don't have to agree with a position. Reasonable people can and should disagree, but it's how we handle it. And it, of course, is age dependent. Somebody older is going to be different from somebody younger. But whatever the age, listening is one of the key issues. And of course, modeling the behavior that we're looking for. If we're flying off the handle, we can expect that our kids are probably going to be doing the same. If we don't bring on a sort of a mood of self-righteousness by how good we are for not doing it, because that becomes a problem in and of itself. But recognizing, look, I see you're upset and these kinds of emotions, or statements, but one of the things that I fight for all the time, it's not always easy, but I've said it with my patients, I've said it with my own family, I've said it to myself, and that is that having a regular debriefing meeting, whether you're with family members or with other members of a house, right now, especially with COVID, it's just like work-related issues. You have to sit down and talk about what the plan is. And there's a real structure to this, and that is that people gather on a regular basis, and you start off with, this is what's working. And when we do brain scans, what we find is that when you start off with the positive, it activates certain parts of your brain that predispose you to be open and to be positive and to hear what you know is coming next. And sometimes people even laugh when you dredge up something positive because they know the drill. Mm-hmm. But when you get somebody laughing, that's the release that you absolutely are looking for, and that's a special sauce. Then you can go to the fact that, look, because we're all here, the need for all of us to empty the dishwasher or wash the dishes or whatever, vacuum, whatever the heck it is, becomes more and more important. And then you say, this is what I hope that you can hear that is something important to me. And then there's a discussion, and then it's said, it's a prearranged time. This is the DMZ time. Everybody knows the drill. There's a structure, and there's a way to resolve conflict if it is there. Sweeping it under the rug, we know when we're all on top of each other means it's going to explode. Yeah. And you can gear it to the age of the people around you. You come up with some funny stuff, as we used to with my little kids, but never mind, I'll spare you that. But they get the idea that you sit down and talk about stuff.
In addition to that, one of the things that can really help, I have found, is for a while I had my older son living with us too. He just graduated from college remotely, and his girlfriend living with us too. So we had a very full house. And they are about to embark on independent lives in New York City, which is completely shut down, and they have no plan. They have no syllabus to follow. They have no idea how they are going to support themselves, launch a career, you name it. It's a terrible time to be a college graduate, let's face it. So they started getting kind of panicky almost. And one of the things that I encouraged, and it sounds very artificial in a vacuum, but one of the things that I started encouraging the whole family to think about when we were having family dinners is, okay, let's acknowledge that this stinks. This is a horrible time for all of us on so many levels. You know, everything, life is basically on hold. We don't know when we're going to get to the other side of this. We don't know what the other side is going to look like. What is the new normal going to be? Okay, that's all a given. But let's also take this as an opportunity to do a little self-reflection and a little dreaming and think a little bit more about what's really important to us. Mm. What could I be doing in my life or pursuing as a hobby or in my personal life that's meaningful to me? How could we look at this as an opportunity? And then, you know, everybody kind of looks at me blankly like, well, I don't know. You don't have to tell me right now. Think about it. And then to sort of get the party started in that direction, I would say, like, try to name something good that has come out of this pandemic. Mm. Something small, teeny. And I would say, okay, one thing for me is my husband and I took up running again. I hadn't run in years, and we're enjoying that. That's been a good thing. And then my teenage son said, well, okay, I see where you're going with this. I get to spend more time with the dog. That's great. You know, and just sort of like flip the positive switch a little bit. Again, kind of resets the brain the way Lisa was describing and opens people's minds to possibilities, opportunities, positivity, so that they're not just looking at what they've lost or what challenges they're facing. And I think that's a critical element.
I love that, because I think that mental space is the space that invites more openness. That's a space where you can be more creative, where you can tap into your intuition better, so that when you have to make plans for challenging times, you're better equipped from that space versus a space of panic and, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So I absolutely love that in practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is one thing in your book that I think takes us deeper with regards to triggers. And I hope everybody gets a copy so that they can go deeper. Because when you ask parents what's stressing you out, I can hear a lot of mom going, my kids. If they would simply just listen, yeah, if they would do what they're told, when they're told, I wouldn't be stressed at all. But what you do in your book is you invite us to go deeper. When was the last time? When was the first time that you felt this way? And then you kind of, when you take that journey, especially when you take the invitation and you open your journal and you kind of go with the questions, what you realize is that what you're stressed about now in this moment has very little to do with this moment. And it usually has something to do all the way back to your childhood that you're still carrying around because you never released. And this moment is just reminding you that you're still carrying it. And I love that aspect. I love the questioning that you invite us to kind of get still and go deep to really explore. Because for me, it helps parents, especially moms who say, I'm stressed because my kids don't listen, move past the fact that their stress is solely related to somebody else. And now kind of give you more responsibility where you can realize that I have more power here than I'm letting on. And I have more control over how I heal. And so what really affects me today, just like you were saying, putting that raincoat on.
Yep. I agree. And what you're talking about with people saying, my kids are stressing me out because they're not listening. They're not doing what I'm asking them to. At the heart of that, it's not so much what the kids are doing. It's a control issue. Yes. And feeling like you don't have control. And so then if you think back, well, when else in my life have I not felt like I have control? Or where else in my life right now do I feel like I don't have control? And you connect the dots. Then you get a greater understanding, a richer understanding of your feelings and what you can do about them.
Absolutely.
In addition, let me add, yes, when you are typically feeling that you don't have a lot of control, you feel uncertain, and uncertainty drives anxiety to the roof. One of the recommendations to parents these days is to understand that it's stressful for everybody. It's stressful for the kids. They've got stressed out parents also, and they're going to reflect that. And so one thing we can do is kind of manage our expectations and just acknowledge that it's not going to be easy right now. And if the kids have to watch television and eat dinner at the same time instead of doing their homework, you know, maybe just you got to let it go. It's not going to be the end of Western civilization. It just is. And thinking that by doing that, you can calm yourself down and sometimes have a window open on your own ability to find a creative solution, because that's what you're really trying to do by understanding the past, is finding a creative solution for right now. And giving yourself a little bit of space to breathe by not having the kids in your face, which of course is overstimulating, is one way that you can begin to think of new ways to resolve old problems.
I love it. In your book, you also describe a recovery plan by reactor types. And I think that's really important for people to dive into richly. But here I wanted us to just kind of describe a general sort of recovery plan. What is it and when should we use it?
Well, I think we should use it all the time before we need to recover, because that would help mitigate and maybe even prevent some of our hyper reactivity that we're all experiencing. So, you know, baseline, some of the things we talked about honoring your body's rhythms, taking care of our bodies with good nutrition, regular exercise and movement. If you don't like exercise, don't use the word exercise, just move, dance, you know, walk, skip, garden, you name it. Just find a way to move. Stress management, whether it's meditating or yoga or just sitting quietly and breathing deeply, using guided imagery, whatever works for you. Those are kind of like the baseline, turn down the temperature recommendations. But then in addition, doing things like checking your thoughts and sort of not controlling them, but guiding them in helpful directions. One of the things that can make emotional inflammation so much worse is ruminating, going over and over what's bothering you to the point where you just cycle down a rabbit hole of despair. And that doesn't do anybody any good. So short-circuiting that process, guiding your thoughts in a healthy direction, looking at things that trigger you. Like one of the things that I realized in the course of writing this book with Lisa is that too much media, which is kind of ironic because I'm a part of the media, loosely speaking, too much media exposure triggers me. So I have made a blanket policy that I read the physical newspaper in the morning and then I don't check the news feeds for the rest of the day. Nothing is going to happen during the day that is going to change what I do. I can find out the next day.
There's always the hope. A frantic reactor will think, oh, there's always the hope. What happened? Did something happen?
But if something huge happens, I figure I'm going to hear about it from a friend or from some other means. I don't have to check the media. So that helps lower my emotional reactivity to begin with. In addition, doing things like getting a hug from somebody you love releases oxytocin, and that has a calming effect. Spending time with your dog can do the same thing. Spending time in nature. Lisa, I'm just going to run away with this, so you should jump in. There's so many things you can do. Basically, it's like a whole menu. You pick and choose what's going to work for you and put together a plan. Lisa, add on to some of the ones that you're most fond of.
Well, this is obviously, I think, nicely structured. There are the things that we can do that are obvious. We all know we're supposed to sleep right, we're supposed to eat right, we're supposed to exercise. Those are obvious. What I like about our book that Stacey and I, it was really a labor of love, is that we say why. So rather than having it just be a prescription, do this, do that, do the other, you really understand what the microbiome in your gut, in other words, why it's important to eat food. Those workers are down there, night and day. They're like little factories working in the dark, providing us with everything we need. We should take pity on them and make sure that they get well fed. They're working for us. So what I like about the book is both that we have taken the usual prescriptions and told people why, and made it something which can be emotional so that you can connect with it. Just given the facts doesn't really allow people to connect. So there's that. But then there is this other world that we don't really know a lot about. And that is our sort of unconscious, subconscious, right below the surface. With the very busy lives that we lead, when we were out and about, if you would look, people were looking at their phones walking down the street. If they were waiting for something, looking at their phones. We are always being stimulated. So what happens is that those parts of our brain, which have evolved, and this is why you get that a sense sometimes in the shower, people will come up with creative ideas and they realize that they're kind of in another world. This musing time is something that we've lost. We don't walk in nature to get from one place to the next. We don't have time. And the reality is we don't have time not to, because we're missing some of the most important aspects. And that is our connection to a world that is not alien to us, because the one we have really put together is alien. And fortunately, we're beginning to realize that. We're seeing it in biophilic design, which means buildings that now have the shapes of nature. For instance, instead of rectangular shapes, we have curving shapes using natural products. And we have the sounds of waterfalls. We see greenery. So we are beginning to realize that we need to bring all these lessons that nature has, as a child of nature, that nature has to teach us. And by respecting these, the idea is that if we're alert to what's happening to us, that we begin to respect all life, whether it's animals and plants and the ecosystems, and most important, of course, each other. And so we are hoping that these lessons, once you pop that hood and get down deeper into the core of what makes us healthy human beings from a physical and mental perspective, that this will, we hope, I have a buddy who coined the term solastalgia. His name is Glenn Albrecht. He's an Aussie. And it's the sadness that we feel out of seeing the loss of treasured places from extreme weather events or industrial actions. And he's coined a new term, which is, I hope, a predictor of the future. He thinks so. It's called the Symbiocene era that he predicts, where we humans, who are at the top of the food chain, of course, look at the world and each other, nature, and recognize that we need to be kindred spirits. And this is a symbiotic relationship that he is predicting and hoping for. And of course, I'm sure all of us do too.
That's beautiful.
One of the things that really helps with spending time in nature, as Lisa sort of tangentially mentioned, is paying attention. You know, if you go for a walk in nature and you've got your cell phone out and you're looking at it, that's not going to do a whole lot of good. What you really want to do is engage your senses. You know, look at what's happening around you, like the trees, the flowers, the wildlife. Hear their sounds. Soak in the smells of fragrant bushes and trees and flowers and so on. And with the more senses you engage, the more calming the effect is. And along with that effect, as well as looking at the night sky, you know, stargazing, just going for a walk and looking up, is it instills a sense of awe and wonder. It helps us realize that we're part of something that's larger than ourselves. And that's actually sort of comforting. And it also helps us appreciate the beauty around us in so many ways. And now that we're on side, we may not have as many opportunities to do that, but we can still do that. You know, you can do that. One of the things that's been really amazing during this pandemic is how many artists have been putting things together to entertain us at home. Over the weekend, my husband and I watched Hamilton, which I had never seen on stage. And afterwards, I thought, wow, that was literally an awe-inspiring experience. And it all took place on a stage. You know, it's not related to nature, but that was a treat. I felt like we nourished our souls. You know, we nourished our psyches by watching that. So the more we can all do that, the better.
One more thing, and that is that voluminous studies now show that the experiences that we have in nature lower our blood pressure, they lower our heart rate, they lower our respiration rate, they boost our immune systems. The smells that are derived from what are called phytoncides, they're special scents from certain plants. There are about 5,000 of them, including onions and garlic, by the way, so you don't have to necessarily get into a national forest. But all of these have very, very healthy impacts on our ability to fight infection. And you can even measure now white blood cells and see that the natural killer cells get boosted, the other white blood cells, T cells, get boosted. We now have metrics that show what has been known for thousands of years, which is that nature does bring healing. Now we can measure it. So now it's up to us. Being smart is turning what we know into what we do. So boy, you know, if you're a person that's an urban planner, get us cities with lots of green. If you are a policymaker, make sure that the funding is there with policies that call for it. If you're a teacher, teach kids. If you're a parent, take your kids out. It's really our critical now call to recognize that our health and the health of the planet depends on our recognizing this. One last thing about awe, which is just crazy fun, is that it is the only emotion that is responsible for secreting a certain chemical, interleukin-6, which is a key factor in inflammatory responses. So in these days, watching Hamilton and getting some awe, this is what we want in a time of a pandemic. So Get your all where you can, and know that once we're released, that we need to restore the beauty of the nature that has been such a bountiful presence in our evolution.
Before I ask you that final question, I just wanted you to share where our viewers can find out more about each of your work.
We have a website about the book, emotionalinflammationbook.com. You can also order it on Amazon, find it at your local bookstore if you ever get to go to your local bookstore again. So there's that. You can Google each of us and find out about other projects that we've been involved in. As you noted at the beginning, Nicole, I've written several books, and those can be found on Amazon and at different bookstores. But, you know, now that we're all at home, we can find out lots about each other on the computer. It's all there at our fingertips.
So my final question to you ladies is, what does it mean to you to live an empowered life?
Oh boy, great. Really the essence of so much, I think, of what drives us is in life is wanting to feel a sense of purpose, wanting to feel important, that our lives have meaning, that we're relevant. And so often what I find is that while we know a lot, we don't necessarily turn it into what we do. So by that I mean, we know there's social ills. We know that things aren't fair. And sometimes we can get overwhelmed, but that's why I urge people to look at this book. Find out what you're good at. Find out what your passion is. Find out what you care about. Find others, look for them, find others so that you are a part of something bigger, that magic sauce of being a part of something bigger. And look at ways that you can change the world in a positive direction. And don't ever fall victim to the statement, oh, that what one person does doesn't matter, because of course it does. All of the things that we do are added together. It's a collective, just like voting on election day. Yeah, one vote usually doesn't matter, but that's not how we count votes. So everything that we can do to turn what we know into what we do turns us from being what is a bystander in life to an upstander. And I can't think of anything more empowering than that transition, that empowering, empathic transition to a place where we feel our lives have meaning.
Beautiful. Stacey, you?
So what Lisa was saying about being an upstander is incredibly important. And along with that, you can do that on a broad stage or in your own sphere of influence, whether that's with your family, in your community, with your friends, standing up and speaking up for what you believe in, for what you think is right and what you think needs to change. And you can do that with environmental issues, social issues, human rights, you name it, education. And when you do that, you start to move the needle of change in a more positive direction bit by bit. And that makes things better for society at large and the world at large, but it also brings satisfaction and empowerment and gives you a sense of inner strength. And resiliency. The fact that you think, you start to feel like I can make a difference, I can make things better. That is kind of the antidote to emotional inflammation and feeling stuck in situations or circumstances that you're not happy with. And so I think that's a huge part of it. Feeling empowered is really a huge part of the antidote to emotional inflammation. You feel less victimized, less vulnerable. You feel like you can handle the slings and arrows that life sends your way. And you feel steadier on your own feet and more comfortable in your own skin. And that's just a magical combination.
I love it. Ladies, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for all the wisdom in your book. And I think for creating something that was tangible, not just informative, but really practical, where we could take tools away to transform our lives and realign, connecting with ourselves, each other, and our planet. It was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Well, let me say thank you to you. Stacey and I have done this often enough to know that the particularly joyful interviews for us are the ones where the person is so deeply, closely engaged in these issues. And we can sense that about you very, very powerfully. So thank you so much. Wonderful
Thank you
questions.
so
Great,
much.
great spirit to this.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Empowered Kids TV. I'd like you to do us two favors. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe and press the bell icon so we can notify you of upcoming episodes and you don't miss any of our amazing programs. And if you found value, please share it. It still takes a village. So share this with your family and friends. As we always say here at Empowered Kids TV, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude, empower us. Until next time.